These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. More info at teethhealth.com, code Thom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Thom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Thom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Thom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Thom.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations. from 1933 to 1996 and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Wayward promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. It is the first Monday of spring. The vernal equinox happened. That's it, right? Vernal is spring, I think. Yeah. That happened Saturday. And fun fact, every spring and fall in the morning on the vernal and autumnal equinox, Abraham Lincoln, in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., there's 2 pillars in front of him, and the sun goes right between those 2 pillars so that there's the shadow of 2 pillars on either side of him, and the sun is directly at him, as if it's like Stonehenge or something. But so that happened Saturday, and you could probably still see it a little bit today if you're in Washington, D.C. Anyhow, really big program today. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Rand Paul and a brand new epidemic in the United States. Now, there's good news and bad news. We'll get into that in just a moment. But this is something for which we may not even have any protection outside of the vaccines. I got my vaccine, by the way, yesterday. I'm speaking to you with a sore arm. We're anticipating, everybody I know has gotten sick for a day after their second shot. So probably 2 weeks from today, because my second shot is a week from Sunday. So 2 weeks from today, in all probability, Jefferson Smith will be filling in for me. So, but anyhow, that's what's going on. Ron DeSantis is covering up deaths in Florida. We're going to get into that. In the second hour of the program, Aunna Dennis is going to be with us about keeping your eyes on Georgia, the latest on, as Aunna refers to it, putting cologne on Jim Crow. And then I want to get into an extended rant in our second hour about how the American Taliban has seized our courts, and it's time to take them back. We need to unpack our courts. And what's Leonard Leo up to? What's with this $250 million, the $10 million for Brett Kavanaugh, $10 million for Amy Coney Barrett? We'll get into all that in the second hour. And also D.C. statehood, which Mitch McConnell has said is a socialist plot. Right, because D.C.'s filled with socialists, right? Just ask Mitch McConnell, who lives there. And in our third hour, Rianna Eckel is going to be here with us about the 2021 Water Act and the growing threat of water privatization. And we're going to get into, in some detail, how institutional racism and gun culture have poisoned America. Back to the Georgia shootings. I want to reprise that topic in our third hour. I used to live in Georgia. I'm a graduate of the Georgia Police Academy. I wrote about this over the weekend. In Georgia, you can walk into a gun store, show your state ID, and drop a few $100 on the counter, walk out with a gun, and shoot somebody in 10 minutes. On the other hand, in Georgia, if you want to vote, it takes a month. Honest to God. I'll tell you all about it in the third hour. We will be getting into those details as we go through the day. And of course, all that said, on any of those topics, our telephone number, 202-808-9925. So I want to start out with Rand Paul and his fellow mask holes. These guys could be bringing us a whole brand new pandemic. And, I mentioned this briefly on the program on Friday. I don't think it's gotten anywhere near enough attention. I wrote about it on HartmannReport.com over the weekend. And, a lot of people were like, what? Really? And, but in that op-ed, there's the links to all the science and, what everybody said. But, here's what happened, basically. I mean, Rand Paul is an entitled, preening ass of the first order. And he refuses to wear a mask because he says, I've already had COVID. And so I'm immune. I'm not going to get it again. And therefore, why should I bother wearing a mask? And then he says to Fauci, he says, and I'm quoting here, he says, you've been vaccinated and you parade around in 2 masks just for show. You can't get it again. There's virtually a 0% chance you're going to get it. And you're telling people who've had the vaccine, who have immunity, you're defying everything we know about immunity by telling people to wear masks who've been vaccinated. Now, there is a certain logic to this, right? And I'm seeing increasingly people in their 60s, 70s, 80s walking around, Portland or around my neighborhood anyway, without masks. And I'm assuming that these people who are people who've been vaccinated. About a third of all Americans over 65 have been vaccinated now, at least one shot. And I'm assuming that these are people who've been vaccinated and therefore they think they don't need to wear a mask anymore. So this is how Anthony Fauci replied to that, what seems like a logical position. Hey, I've got the vaccine, I'm immune, I've had, or in the case of Rand Paul, I've had COVID, I'm immune. So, I mean, again, first of all, keeping in mind that in the last 20 years, we have seen 3 of these coronaviruses now. SARS, which kills 1/5 of the people who get it. The original SARS that came out around the turn of the century. MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which they get from camels and is still popping around in the Middle East. That kills about a third of the people who get it. And this new one, it's called SARS-CoV-2, also known as COVID-19. And the problem is that there's a new mutation of the COVID-19 that eventually may get its own designation as a separate coronavirus. And it may only be the beginning of the mutation process. This is what Fauci told Rand Paul on live television last Thursday. He said, quote, in the South African study conducted by Johnson & Johnson, they found that people who were infected with the wild type of COVID, like, you, Senator Rand Paul, got, and were exposed to this variant in South Africa, the 351 variant, it was as if they had never been infected before. They had no protection. So as I said earlier, there's a good news, bad news. The bad news is what Fauci just said there, which is that Rand Paul, even though he thinks he's immune and he doesn't have to wear a mask because he's already had COVID, he could get the South African variant as if he never had it before. And the South African one is actually deadlier than the regular one. So if you've had COVID and you think you're immune and you don't need a vaccine, think twice. All right, that's the bad news. The good news is, and by the way, the South African variant is showing up in the United States. It has already popped up in a half a dozen states. And it's ripping through Europe, which is part of the reason why France is shutting down right now. You saw these protests in Germany, a lot of it being fed by foreign trolls, posing as Germans, going, freedom, freedom. I think they need to start spelling that word, F-R-E-E-D-U-M-B. But in any case, that's going on. But just let that sink in. Fauci said the South African variant, if you've already had COVID, no protection, as if you've never been infected before. Now, the good news is that if you've had the vaccine and you get the South African variant, it's, depending on the vaccine, they've looked at 3 of them now, it's between 60 and 70% effective at preventing you from even getting infected with the South African variant, and 100% effective at preventing you from getting so sick you end up in the hospital or so sick that you end up dead. So, bottom line, getting vaccinated is the key to the whole thing. And we're in a race in time here in the United States against this South African variant, which is right now infecting about as many people as the original wild variant had in February or March of last year. So if we can't get people vaccinated fast enough, we're going to see another wave of this stuff, only it's going to be the South African variant, and it's going to reinfect people who've already had COVID. So we've got a big job to do, and people, these mask holes like Rand Paul saying, no big deal, masks, we don't need no stinking masks. And, in Idaho, where the Idaho legislature, in fact, had to shut down because they had a COVID outbreak after they were cheering on these children who were burning masks because they're crazed parents who've been reading QAnon conspiracy theories. It's nuts.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The BBC podcast on Saturday morning. Quote, the COVID crisis in Europe is getting worse and quickly. This is why. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
You're welcome, my good friend. It's a beautiful day here in Long Beach. I want to share something with you. The Democrats got one choice. They've got to get rid of that filibuster. If they get rid of the filibuster and handle their business, then Papa Joe, he's got a chance to become the next Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, another thing that's going on, for the next 2 years, I believe that maybe even longer, those insurrection trials are going to be going on. It's just going to be a matter of time before public officials are named. So if the Democrats handle their business, they can just ignore the Republican Party because they're going to be out of business pretty quick. They have no platform. They don't really have too much to offer. And if Papa Joe's putting money in people's pockets, and if we get past this epidemic, the guy will win re-election if he's in the grave. That's just my opinion. Thank you. I
think your opinion is absolutely right, Morris. I am totally with you. And taking down the filibuster has to be job one. And frankly, I think that Schumer and Biden are playing this right, rather than just coming right out of the gate saying, "Yeah, we're going to do away with it," and sounding all arrogant and full of themselves and whatever. I mean, this is how the American people would interpret it. They're saying, we would love the Republicans to work with us on voting rights. I mean, voting rights is important stuff. Voting rights have been passed with bipartisan majorities over and over and over again in America. We would love to have their help. Oh, and here comes a voting rights bill. Here comes a piece of legislation. And then when the voting rights bill comes along, they go, well, will any Republicans help us out on this? And then no Republicans do, right? And some Republican says, I filibuster. And suddenly the Democrats turn to the American people and go, well, we have enough votes to pass the Voting Rights Act, the H.R. 1, the For the People Act, but for some reason, Ted Cruz doesn't seem to like it, or Josh Hawley, or Tom Cotton, or Rick Scott, the guys who want to run for president in 2024, they don't like this legislation. So I guess we just need to take care of the filibuster. Are you with us, America? I mean, that's how it's going to play out. I hope. I hope. Andrea in Seattle. Hey, Andrea, what's on your mind?
Hi, it's actually Andrea. And
Andrea, thank you.
Thank you. And do you think Democrats could be doing more to prevent anti-Asian hate? Do you think this bipartisan rhetoric that focuses on China too much might also be fueling it without them even knowing it?
I do. I think that a lot of the anti-Asian hatred that has exploded in the last 4 years can be traced directly back to Donald Trump, and Republicans, like him. I mean, I'm forgetting the name of which one of the weird Republicans it was over the weekend who was using an anti-China slur to describe the Chinese Communist Party, and it's. Yeah, I'm totally with you. And the anti-Asian hatred that we saw, this horrible, there's a hate crime against Asians and against women, right? And there is no hate crime protection for women. There is hate crime protection for racial minorities. We need to extend hate crime protection to women as well. I mean, it's like there's all kinds of stuff here. Andrea, thank you very much for the call.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. I got to run, but it's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. And Ron DeSantis, he wants an award, yeah, right after this. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time, and that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, as I was saying, Ron DeSantis is now, he's getting in on this act, right? Because no one was held accountable for 500,000 deaths. There's literally no consensus in America about who's responsible for the fact that Taiwan, that got its first case of COVID the same day we did back and the first death from COVID as well, back in March of last year. Taiwan has had 12 people die now. South Korea, it's been a couple hundred. We had 500,000. Nobody has been held responsible for this, which blows my mind. I mean, we really need to be talking about this. Who do we hold responsible for this? Well, Ron DeSantis, Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos writes the headline, Ron DeSantis wants an award, and he deserves one for conducting the biggest cover-up of COVID-19 data. And that's what's going on. On Thursday of last week, Ron DeSantis published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal basically saying,
I ignored the science. I told people they didn't need masks. I kept the state open, and now our economic activity is doing better than a lot of other states. Nya, nya, nya. And what he neglected to say, and by the way, his policies are creating an absolute screaming crisis. You saw, Miami Beach is under a 2-week state of emergency right now with lockdowns and not lockdown, what do you call it? A curfew, an overnight curfew. So, here's DeSantis taking a victory lap after he killed 32,000 Floridians that we know of. And this is where, the truth is we may have no friggin' clue how many people actually died in Florida of COVID. First of all, when the epidemic started, the pandemic started in February and March, medical examiners in the state of Florida would record the cause of death and report it to the county. And then the county would post that on their website and send the information to the state. But it was all public, right? They didn't name the people and the medical examiners, but they listed the cause of death and the numbers. Well, that was starting to look bad for DeSantis because there were starting to be a lot of COVID deaths in Florida, so he changed it. He said, medical examiners, you may no longer tell the counties. You have to tell me. You have to tell the state. And don't worry, we'll publicize that information. But they didn't. They hid it. In fact, as of March 2020, March a year ago, 1 year ago this month, county medical examiners were forbidden from revealing the numbers of deaths or even the cause of death, which led to, in April, now keep in mind, there was no flu last year. Typically in America, there's like 30,000 flu deaths and, a couple 100,000 flu cases. There was like a few hundred or maybe a few thousand flu cases, no flu deaths. We basically had no flu in the United States last year. And the reason why, of course, is because everybody was wearing a mask. Not everybody, but enough. But suddenly in Florida, they had this, in April of last year, they had this huge spike in pneumonia deaths. This is what Ron DeSantis and the state were calling them. These were obviously COVID deaths, but they didn't want to flag them as COVID deaths. And so they said, well, it's pneumonia caused by the flu. But there was no flu. And then you had this data scientist, Dr. Rebecca Jones, who had been working for the state compiling this information. And when Ron DeSantis hid all this information, she put up her own website to show the information. She not only got fired, but the state police raided her home and took her computers, which, as far as I can tell, are still gone. The state medical examiners were up in arms. They called DeSantis' numbers a sham. The Miami Herald said that the data is riddled with holes now. If you were a snowbird, if you live, if you own a condo or a house or an apartment in Florida and you spend the winter months there and the summer months in Michigan or Pennsylvania or wherever, and you get and die of COVID in Florida, they don't even list you as a death in the state because you're not, your driver's license isn't a Florida driver's license because you live, 6 months, 7 months out of the year in Michigan and 5 months out of the year in Florida. This is how bad it is. The rate, and what we do know, which is very little, but what we do know is that the rate of deaths in Florida is 27% higher than Virginia, 36% higher than North Carolina, and 180% higher than Maine, the per capita rate of deaths. Ron DeSantis wants to run for president. Of course, Rick Scott's going to beat him to that. But, he's trying to be the new national hero. He's the guy. I conquered COVID, right? Amazing. He's lying through his teeth. He's shutting down the state government. He's defying the transparency laws. And now the headlines are that Trump thinks that Ron DeSantis is going to refuse to deport him, to render him to New York when the indictments come down. It's bizarre.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But in the meantime, because of this South African variant, number one, get vaccinated. And number two, even if you're vaccinated or you had COVID before, continue to wear your mask.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And the Thom Hartmann. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from in Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Doomed verses would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
On the Science Revolution is Dr. Justin Frank, author of the Trump, Obama, and Bush on the Couch series of books. He's here on how to deal with the trauma of the pandemic and the trauma of 4 years of Trump. It's been a stressful time. Some of us have lost family and friends and have found it difficult to stay safe and pay the bills. The Trump years have been a challenge to democracy and our sanity. Dr. Justin Frank is here to help. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a reminder, in the second and third hour of our program, we're going to get into what's going on in Georgia with the latest on Georgia voter suppression, the new Jim Crow, James Crow Esquire, the American Taliban seizing our courts, and what's up with this $250 million fund that Leonard Leo is administering. D.C. statehood, the first hearings are going to be today in Congress. We'll be talking about that. And in our third hour, we are going to get into the growing threat of water privatization and how institutional racism and gun culture, as demonstrated by what happened in Georgia last week, have poisoned America. So, you know, that's all coming up in the next couple of hours. But just to get things rolling here, what's on your mind today? Tom in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Love your show. I was watching the Rand Paul and the Dr. Fauci exchange. What they didn't really bring up, I think, is that if people are running around without masks, nobody knows who is just doing this voluntarily, if they've already had the virus, or if they've been immunized. And right now we're only at, about 30%, and 70%, as they're saying, is probable herd immunity. So we're not even close right now to being able to Yeah, Tom, we're only at 30% first shot, and the majority of those are people over 60. Okay.
I think if you look at fully immunized, we're like, you know, in the high teens. But anyhow, continue your rant, because I think you're on something here.
And so we're quite far away from people walking around without masks. Because if I see somebody without a mask, I'm avoiding them. I totally avoid them, unless I'm in a very large area where I can avoid stay away from people, certainly. But so the question, I guess, is at what point can we do that? At what point can we identify people? And I haven't really heard anything coming from the government that would end up indicating that. They probably, I hope, have a plan, but I don't know what that plan is. I work in healthcare, and our masks are up all the time, everybody in the place, and it's going to end up staying that way for a period of time, possibly until the herd immunity is thought to be present.
Right,
so just wanted to make that point.
Your point is excellent. And with that original wild virus, the herd immunity was estimated to be around 70%. Now with the B1715, 117, whatever it is, the UK variant, they're saying it's going to take into the 80s because it's more virulent. You know, probably the most virulent virus that infects humans right now is measles. And to achieve herd immunity with measles requires 97% vaccination. It's that contagious. So the more contagious it is, the higher the percentage of vaccination you have to have herd immunity. A phrase that only applies to vaccinations. And you're absolutely right. And now we've got these new variants coming. And, all of this raises an interesting question, Tom. And it's one I've been thinking about writing about, but my thoughts on it are not yet clear. And, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, too. You, Tom, and anybody else who wants to call in. Israel is doing a passport system, basically. You get an electronic passport. I don't know if you've ever flown on an airplane and used your phone, your iPhone or your Android phone, as your boarding pass, but it's real easy. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. They've got a variation on that shows a QR code that can be scanned, and that's almost impossible to fake, because it's tied to your identity and to your medical records. This QR code. And a color. And if the color is green and they scan the QR code and it says, yep, he's been vaccinated, then you can get on a plane. There's some places in Israel you can go, others you can't go if you don't have this. Here in the United States, a company called Clear, which has, if you go through airports, you'll see these Clear stations where you go up and they've got your eye scan, they've got your fingerprints, you put your ID down and you put your fingerprints, you put your fingers on the fingerprint reader, and boom, you don't have to go through the whole song and dance. I mean, you still have to run your stuff through the magnetometer, but that's it. It's like super fast. It's even faster than pre. And that company, which is a private corporation, by the way, that company, Clear, is developing, or at least this was the news release about 2 weeks ago in the Financial Times, is developing their own version of a I had COVID vaccine passport. And there are airlines that are thinking about starting to use this, and cruise ships are thinking about using this. And, the pushback on it is, hey, these are my medical records. What about privacy? This thing is keeping track of me, as it were. I think, frankly, for public health, that's a reasonable trade-off. What say you, Tom?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, just sending, after you've gotten the vaccination, send that person via their phone that is just only allowed to be at their phone, some type of code or something like that, as you have in a UPC thing, something like that. That will end up being a passport, as you say. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's like a boarding pass. I mean, when I book flights, I typically fly on United, Delta, or Alaska Air, and all three of them now. You book a flight. It's the day of the flight. They send you an email. You click a link, or you open the app on the phone, and boom, there's your boarding pass, complete with a QR code that you can scan at the gate. I haven't used a paper boarding pass in years now, and it saves paper. It's uniquely mine. Nobody else can get it. Nobody else can copy it. And if you can do that, for 1 million passengers, 2 million passengers a day, and with no fraud, every single one's clean and clear, and the government has signed off on it. We should be able to do that with other things. Tom, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Lee in Houston, Texas. Hey, Lee, what's up?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. So I wanted to talk a little bit about political responsibility. We talk about these COVID deaths as if they're complete victims. Bottom line, if you vote for Republicans and they deliver the type of government that you voted for, which is, focus on yourself and boost the economy, and, we're not living in a society, it's, all the rest of it, and then you end up dead, I think you're all to blame. So if 32,000 Floridians or 40,000 or whatever the number is, voted for this, and then they got what they were voting for, they never retracted. They never said, "Oh, I was wrong," And then you get what you pay for. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind, and now there's 40,000 less red voters in Florida. So over to you.
Well, we're seeing that at a state-by-state level. There was an amazing study that was published, and I've got a link to it in my piece over at HartmannReport.com that was published last Thursday or Friday, I believe, that it was fairly widely reported on. It's fairly easy to just search for. that showed that COVID deaths spiked in the first months in March, April, May. They spiked in blue states, in New York, Connecticut, Washington State, and New Jersey that had Democratic governors. When you look at the entire year of COVID deaths, overwhelmingly the majority of COVID deaths on a per capita basis happened in red states, in states with governors who were not enforcing mask mandates and did not shut down. So, yeah, you could say that. But, Lee, I don't think anybody deserves to die because their politics are bizarre or wrong. And not only that, for every person who's infected, I mean, you may have some right-wing maskhole who goes out and gets himself infected, doesn't really realize he's contagious, visits grandma in the nursing home, and suddenly 8 people are dead in the nursing home, and they may be good Democrats. I mean, it's like, I get your sentiment, but yeah, sure, rebut it.
Yeah, no, I'm not rebutting it exactly, but I think you know very well that politics is not just something we do for fun. It is life and death. All of these decisions that we're making are life and death decisions, whether it's health care, whether it's economic decisions or equity. I mean, there are our quality of life and our length of life is at stake, and we are arguing, our political arguments are an argument about how to best optimize our lives. That's it. I mean, the stakes could not be any higher. So occasionally you get an easy... I mean, it's complicated usually, and it's hard to get to the outcome from the process. But with this one, it's easy. Like if you do X, then your COVID kills you, and if you do Y, then it doesn't kill you, and it's all pretty quick, and you can see, And so this is an opportunity for us to really point the finger and say, "Hey, guys, you did it to yourselves. You voted for Ron DeSantis, and he gave you exactly what you voted for. So don't. In fact, not only are we going to not listen to you when you come crying, but we're going to point our finger at you and say you were wrong, and you need to admit it. All right."
Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But it raises a larger question, Lee. Donald Trump started all this. And, the COVID denial, it's just going to go away magically one day. It's just like the flu. When he knew he was lying through his teeth, because, in January of last year, 14 months ago, he told Bob Woodward, this thing is deadly. It's worse than the flu. And then he proceeded to lie to us for almost an entire year. And the question is why? I think he thought he could distract us and just say, hey, look over there at the stock market, and people would vote for him. But maybe there's another reason. I don't know. Can you think of one, Lee? I can't.
I think it was all economic for him, and then once he makes the position, he sticks with it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hang on.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I think you're right, Lee. And this is why the Chamber of Commerce and FreedomWorks and these other groups, they've all been pushing, hey, it's time to open up. Yeah, let's make some money. It doesn't matter if people die. And welcome back. Diamond in Hollywood, California. Hey, Diamond, what's up? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Hey. How are you, Tom? I am kind of disagreeing. Thank you. I'm glad you're doing good with your vaccine. I'm kind of disagreeing with Lee. I had an experience this past week. I have a Trumper friend of mine who is what they call log cabin Republicans here in West Hollywood. And he went to
in other words, a gay Republican.
Gay Republican, which is kind of weird. Right. He went to a pub, Mrs. Robinson's here in Schuylkill Lake. No one was wearing a mask. I just had to call the health department over there, and it's, just because that particular pub and him may be Republicans. Now, his he might be a carrier for all I know,
Exactly.
And so, it doesn't just stay in Republican areas. It doesn't just stay with voters that vote Republican. I'm totally against our Governor Newsom reopening things because it gives the general public this idea that they think that everything's fine now when only like 25% of people have been vaccinated. We've all got to wait our turn.
Yeah, no, and these governors who are doing this, I mean, here in Oregon, we have kind of gone back and forth on slightly opening restaurants and then closing them back up. And now Kate Brown, our governor, and I think, frankly, she's done a very good job. But is now defining it on a county by county basis, and she's got this series of threat levels. And if you hit a certain threat level, then you've got to shut down, and just completely running the things by science and the numbers. But that said, there was a poll that was published a couple of days ago finding that her popularity ratings are in the tank. And yet we only, statewide, we had 238 cases yesterday. Not deaths, cases. We had 2 deaths. I mean, Oregon is doing really, really well because, for a whole year, basically, our governor has kind of kept her thumb on things. But you've got right-wing hate radio in this state. You've got, right-wing newspapers. You've got right-wing politicians. You've got it's just, just this constant drumbeat trashing her and any other Democrat, but her in particular, because A, she's a Democrat, B, she's a woman, and C, she's the governor who's actually taking responsibility for the state. And I just, I think we're going to be looking back on this moment, when the virus got politicized, with deep sadness and loss. It's just, it's a tragedy. I don't know how to describe it beyond that, Diamond.
Yeah, and I talked to my friend, and I said, he goes on and on about freedom, his freedom, and how it's not right, and he doesn't believe that masks really help things. I have a, parent who's 90. I have a boyfriend that's a couple of decades younger than me that, I have to see for 11 minutes across my room, and I haven't seen my dad in a year, It's not like it's his freedom, but it's not anybody else's freedom.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. The whole libertarian thing, it's like, greed as a political statement. It's frankly very, very sad. Diamond, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thanks for listening to KPFK. We'll be right back in 1 minute with more of your calls right after this. My Hidden History series has been growing. So far, I've taken on guns, the Supreme Court, voting, monopolies, and oligarchy. They're available wherever fine books are sold. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 10 minutes before the hour. Paula in Miami, Florida. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I called you a few months ago and told you about Florida running ghost candidates. They put a thing on CNN. They actually arrested a guy, a Republican House member, because they found out he ran a ghost candidate. It's been going on for 12 years in Florida that all these Republicans run these ghost candidates. They use a last name that's similar to the Democrats' name. They send out flyers to all the people in the state saying they're liberal, they're progressive, and they pull off thousands of votes from the election, and they win by like 36 votes. Well, they finally arrested a man in Florida for this. It's illegal. And they've been doing this for 12 years for the House races and the Senate races. They've been cheating all along.
Yeah, no, I read the story, Paula, and I think it's great that they nailed this guy. Are they going to hold another election because the Democrat who lost, like you said, lost by 36 votes? No?
I'm not sure. I didn't hear about that. If they were going what they were going to do.
Seems like they should.
It's just that, they should for all these races because this has been going back 12 years. This is their tactic in Florida, and I don't know if DeSantis is in on it because someone's putting their names on the ballots. This third party.
Well, I think it's the local Republican parties. They're the ones who have that. That power to do that, and I'm sure this is not confined to Florida. We saw the same thing being done with the Green Party, where the Republican Party in Idaho, as I recall, in the 2016 election, gave like $100,000 to the Green Party to run a candidate in the hopes that they would knock down, Democratic candidates. This is for president.
These aren't even real candidates. They're actually fake. They're ran by the Republicans.
I totally get it. Paula, thank you for the call, and thanks for bringing it up and sharing that with our listeners. Daryl in Denville, New Jersey. Hey, Daryl, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, Tom? Just two quick comments. One is any attempt to specify, who has the COVID vaccine and giving them, greater mobility, greater access to commerce or whatever would never work in this country, because backwards evangelicals and people who support them would call this the mark of the beast, and it would go nowhere. That's my first comment.
But hang on just a second, Daryl. They said that years ago. I mean, this was the original rationalization for making it illegal to use Social Security numbers as identifiers, and then they said that about real ID on driver's licenses. Oregon is the last state. We're just starting to get real ID. But the fact of the matter is that when Republicans are bragging at you about how they want to do voter suppression, they will always say, well, you've got to have a driver's license to pick up a prescription at the drugstore. You've got to have a driver's license to get on an airplane. You got to have your ID. So, what's wrong with having a card that proves you are who you are? Well, isn't having a card or an app on your phone that proves that you've actually had a vaccine just is essentially the identical same thing? I mean, doesn't their own logic blow up that argument?
Hypocrisy, Tom. That's the word of the day. The second thing is
you nailed it.
The second thing is there's an article in MedPage today written by Dory Segev, who's I guess he's a transplant doctor at Johns Hopkins, and apparently there's a national study going on, and I'm post-double lung transplant, where it says only 17% of post-solid organ transplant patients mounted detectable antibodies to COVID. That's after the first shot.
That's because those folks are on immune suppressant drugs, right?
Well, yeah, I take mycophenolate, which is a metabolite, but even those who are not on the metabolites have lower immune responses, and those who are taking the metabolites are even lower, only 8.75% detectable antibodies in those taking metabolites. So we really rely on everyone getting vaccinated. We were hoping that we would be able to mount the same kind of immune response as everyone else, but that may not be the case. So those who are deciding that they're not going to get the vaccine, they're putting us in danger. That's all I wanted to say.
That's 25% of all the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives, and more than half of all the Republicans in the Ohio State House of Representatives, where one of their spokespeople just said yesterday the whole COVID thing is a hoax. They're not getting vaccinated, these Republicans. I agree. I agree. This is absolutely obscene, and because they're putting your life at risk, Daryl. You and every other person who's had an organ transplant in the United States. Not to mention, older people, and keep in mind, even the vaccines are not 100% effective. So it's grim stuff. Daryl, I got to run. Thank you. Grace in Los Angeles. Grace, we just have a half a minute to the end of the hour. You got a quick one?
Sure. I just wanted to mention that the P1 variant is basically decimating Brazil right now, and the reason for that is because most of these variants, unlike the wild type is like a sticky key in a lock. It takes a little jiggling to get it to work. These variants slip right in, no problem, easy open, and they pop right into the cell. So that, and then the other and we should be very concerned about that because Brazil's hospitals have no ICU beds. And then the other thing, I just wanted to disagree with you on the travel passport with vaccines, because 100 countries in the world have no vaccines right now. They can't even get them if they wanted them. So then we have people who can't travel at all. So,
Well, I'm talking at least domestically. Would you consider it domestically?
Perhaps, but then it becomes more of an issue because people don't necessarily have, final destination domestically. They have separate tickets that they're booking.
No, I get that in a larger sense. I'm just thinking I don't want to be on a plane with people who haven't been vaccinated. Maybe that's just me. Yeah, but I totally get your concern, and which brings up a whole other issue of how we're screwing the third world on this. Grace, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. Book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Aunna Dennis, the Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia. CommonCause.org/Georgia is the website. Common Cause GA is the Twitter handle. And Aunna, welcome back to the program. Give us an update on putting cologne on Jim Crow. What's going on down there in Georgia?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, again for having me to talk more about what's going on down here in Georgia. So, like you said, it's putting cologne on Jim Crow. It's Jim Crow suited up in a suit and tie. It's really the narrative of suppression that's going on down here. So right now we still have 3 omnibus catch-all bills that are attempting to suppress the vote of many Georgians across the state. We still see attacks to different provisions around vote by mail, different things like in-person voting, limiting early voting hours, and limiting drop box access. So these are some of the attacks that we're seeing. We're seeing other egregious things around, like taking over our boards of elections and different things like that. So we still see these different types of suppressive antics going on down here in Georgia.
Aunna, I have a question here, and it just calls for speculation on your part, but I've been thinking about this for a while. When you see people in line I used to live in Georgia. I lived in Cobb County, in a mostly white suburb, and then we moved up north to Roswell in an entirely white suburb. And I never literally, in my whole entire life, I don't think I've ever waited more than 10 or 15 minutes to vote. That's it. But the longest line was when I lived in Washington, D.C., and that was probably 30 minutes. And again, it was an area that was at least 60% white. And when you see people standing in line for 10 and 11 hours in Georgia because the people running the Republican Party, the people running those counties have decided that they're going to do everything they can to discourage people from voting, you get it that people are actually motivated to vote. And this largely happens in black neighborhoods. It also happens, though, in college areas and where in some cases where there's a lot of seniors who might be Social Security voters. Is it possible that these voter suppression efforts are just going to horribly backfire? That when they make it more difficult to vote, when they make it way more difficult to mail-in vote, keep in mind, Georgia legalized mail-in voting 15 years ago because they wanted older white people who were predominantly Republican to be able to easily and conveniently vote. That those Republican voters are not anywhere near as animated, excited, enthusiastic, upset, angry, pissed off, fill in the blank, right, as are the people who are who this voter suppression is nakedly trying to target. Do you think it's possible that people will say, okay, fine, you're going to make it harder to vote. We're going to try 3 times. You're going to make it twice as hard. We're going to try 3 times harder. And it's going to be a blowout election if they succeed in passing. I'm totally with you. We don't want this to happen. We want to make it easy for everyone to vote. Mm-hmm. But if they succeed, is it possible that they're shooting themselves in the foot?
Tom, I think you're hitting the nail. I definitely do think this may actually backfire because, like you mentioned, that 15 years ago, our vote-by-mail procedures was enacted by a Republican governor, Sonny Perdue, and a Republican-led legislator. And they did this because they did want predominantly white older voters to be able to come out and vote. But what they're doing with these different types of requirements, like having an ID, actually specifically a Georgia ID or a Georgia driver's license or the last 4 of your social, by adding those types of requirements, they're not just impacting brown folks, black folks, students, new majority communities that are merging to vote. They're also impacting their base. And so when I think about these things that they're trying to enact, I'm like, have they actually thought about the impact to their own populations and their own constituent bases? Because I do think this will have a backfiring impact that is going to actually impact all voters across the board in Georgia, not just a select few and not just a select few counties that they would want to dissuade people from voting in those counties. And personally, I know you said you've never waited more than 15 minutes outside of the Beltway, the Washington, D.C. area, but I've definitely waited over 4 to 6 hours. I remember when I first started to vote, when I was, I believe it was the 2004 election, I waited in line with my great aunt for 4 to 6 hours, and this was before they had provisions on if you were disabled, you could jump the line, but we waited in line. And each election cycle, we still had to wait in line. And I will say I do live in a predominantly black area, and I do live in a very populous county called Fulton County. So we definitely have to wait in line. And our elections boards, they had been very creative this cycle, and especially after our primary in June, where we saw people waiting in line 68 hours, where they had these mobile units. But now they've been told that with these mobile units, with this legislation, if it passed, they can only replace brick and mortar precincts and only be used for emergency purposes. So now they're still creating this line management problem without even having more provisional ballots and paper ballots on hand to handle the population and the emergency procedures that will be needed once we have this influx of people who are not able to do their vote by mail ballot and who will need to come to their precincts to vote.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you know, if it didn't come across that way, what I was flagging or pointing out by saying I've never in my life waited more than 15 minutes to vote was my own white privilege. You know, and the fact that white neighborhoods are not targeted like this the way that black neighborhoods are, which just seems obscene. Given that Georgia Republicans are trying to make it harder ultimately for everyone to vote, wink nod, is any part of your strategy in combating this? We're talking with Aunna Dennis, of the executive director of Common Cause Georgia, commoncause.org/Georgia. Is any part of your strategy reaching out to, for example, older Georgia voters who have, you know, for the last decade and a half been using mail-in voting just because it's convenient, and you know, the older you get, the harder it is to get out and stand in line for hours or even minutes. You know, reaching out to those folks and saying, do you realize what your Republicans are trying to do? They're trying to hurt me, but they're going to hurt you.
Yeah, we're definitely reaching out to those targeted voters of those demographics. We're running phone banks, text banks. We definitely ask people from across the country to aid us in helping to reach out to these different types of communities to alert them of what's happening and what their legislatures are really trying to do. Because like you've mentioned, like I've mentioned, this doesn't impact black and brown voters or new communities of voters. This actually impacts all voters in Georgia. And folks forget that, yes, we have in the Atlanta metro area, we have over 5 million voters here, but we have over like 3 million voters across the state who are in other pockets of area. And this really stands a chance to impact them, especially those rural communities who don't have transportation means to be able to get to a precinct or to get to early voting through these set hours of 9 to 5 is what they're trying to set them to, knowing that most people in Georgia go to work before 9 o'clock and they get off of work after 5 p.m.
Yeah, I'm with you. Forgive the interruption, but I see I've got 25 seconds left. What can people who are listening do to help you guys down there in Georgia at commoncause.org/Georgia? How can we help out?
Definitely get the message out, continue the conversations, follow us on our social media handles, definitely join into a text bank, a phone bank, and help us reach out to these hard-to-reach communities.
Great. So go to commoncause.org/Georgia, right? That would be a starting point,
Yes.
Aunna?
Yes, that's a starting point.
Aunna Davis, you are extraordinary, the Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia. Thanks so much for being with us today. Excuse me, Dennis, Aunna Dennis. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Norris in Lincoln Park, New Jersey. Hey, Norris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. First time caller, long-time listener. I just wanted to say about mass shootings that, you know, I just did a quick Google search, and there have been 305 mass school shootings since 1999 in Columbine, and which is a tragedy in this country. And I recently got my gun license. I'm a big time gun lover, but I never owned a gun, and I was never concerned about owning a gun until I moved to a 90% predominantly white neighborhood, and I'm concerned for my kids, and that's one thing that keeps me up at night. So I said to myself,
is that because you're not white, or because most of the school shootings happen in white neighborhoods?
It's because most of the school shootings happen in white neighborhoods, and my kids and myself, we're black, and I'm worried about that. So I think an idea is that we should have someone put posters on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue of all the mass shootings that have happened in this country since 1999, since Columbine, to show how many mass shootings there have been and how many people have died because of the lax gun laws in this country. You know, and there are a lot of people who feel the same way, they may love guns, but may never even want to own a gun because it's more dangerous to have one in your house. But because everyone else has guns, they say, you know what, everyone's got them. I have to have protection for myself and my family too. And that's the same reason why I purchased one. But we shouldn't have to go to that step because we're afraid to live in our own country.
Yeah, I'm with you, Norris, and I do think that the gun movement needs to take a cue from the so-called right to life movement, the anti-abortion movement. They really started getting traction in the 80s and early 90s when they started carrying around posters with pictures of aborted fetuses, and you know, just these gruesome photos, and they're all over the internet. And every protest you go to. You know, an anti-abortion protest, you see these. And without exception, authorities have refused to release the pictures of mass shootings where you've got kids who are just, you know, half their faces blown off or their bodies are just covered with blood and things like that. But I'm guessing that some of the families may have pictures like that. There have to be pictures like that out there somewhere. And
correct,
you know, I mean, it's like, you know, we did this with tobacco, you know, looking at people's lungs, you know, pictures of people's lungs and people as they were dying. I don't think most Americans, we have so sanitized our news, and even in our cops and robbers shows, you know, somebody gets shot and maybe a little blood comes out and they fall down and they go, oh, you know, instead of flopping around and screaming in pain as probably happens, you know, 4/5 of the time when somebody gets shot. That, you know, we have so sanitized it that I don't think people get it. It's an abstraction.
The only way people would be able to see that if we were to put posters in front of the Capitol building or on Pennsylvania Avenue to show all of the mass, not just school shootings, but all of the mass shootings that have happened in this country, and then show how many deaths there have been. Because people shouldn't be afraid to live in their country in order to buy guns because they're scared to go to the movie theaters or to the store.
I'm with you, Norris. And do an annual march on Washington, D.C. the way that the Catholic Church does every year, you know, against abortion. You know, it's like step by step.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Norris. Great to hear from you. I appreciate the call. Thank you. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, you know, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. I do want to do a somewhat deeper dive here, for the second block of the show here, about the American Taliban and how they've essentially seized our courts. This is the piece that I published over at Hartmann Report today, and the American Taliban is having their moment right now, right? The billionaire groups are riding its energy toward larger and larger profits, more and more control of government. And in the process, it's showing how dark money groups have corrupted our courts. This weekend, I don't know if you saw this on Sunday, Dana Bash was doing whatever that show on CNN on Sunday mornings is called, Face the Nation or Meet the Press or whatever it is. And she had Asa Hutchinson on. Asa Hutchinson is the governor of Arkansas. And he just signed a bill that puts women in prison if they have abortions, even if they were impregnated through rape or incest. And she said, "Why'd you do that?" And he basically said, "Well, you know, I would have preferred that we had a rape or incest provision, but the reason we did this really was to get it before the Supreme Court." And she just kind of left it at that. But really, I mean, at that point, I would have gone, "Oh, so you want the entire United States, women who get abortions, to go to prison, even if they've been raped or the pregnancy is the product of incest?" I mean, that would have been my next question. But in any case, this is what's going on. He wants to get this thing before the Supreme Court, and he's coordinating with groups who have this as an agenda. But this is kind of the narrow bore agenda that they publicize, because this is a shout out to the Republican base, to white evangelicals, to Catholics. Although more than half of Catholics think that abortion should be available. I mean, the studies, there's just absolutely no shortage of studies, but still, you know, there fewer than half of Catholics think that abortion should be illegal under all circumstances, and he's shouting out to them. But basically what we've got now is 6 right-wingers on the court, 3 who've already made their preferences known, that they think, or at least implied strongly, that they think that abortion should become criminalized. And then you've got Neil Gorsuch, who has written in his opinions that both abortion and birth control should be something that a state could ban. You've got Amy Coney Barrett, who had never been a judge before, when Barack Obama appointed a highly qualified judge, Myra Selby, a black woman, to be on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Mitch McConnell blocked her so that he could put Amy Coney Barrett in that seat, because she'd never been a judge before, she had no experience, so that she could then segue from that into the Supreme Court, which is exactly what he did. So, but like I said, the visible part of their effort is abortion. The invisible part of the effort, but the real reason why they are cranking out all this money, Leonard Leo's groups have poured $250 million into these efforts, into packing our courts. $10 million into Amy Coney Barrett, $10 million into Neil Gorsuch, $10 million into Brett Kavanaugh through the so-called Judicial Crisis Network. Now he's got a new group. That group kind of got a bad name, so he's I mean, you know. But what they're really all about is restricting voting rights, expanding the rights of polluters to pollute, expanding corporate profits, lowering taxes on billionaires and corporations, making it harder for people to sue to get information about how companies are hurting them or screwing them, making it harder for consumers and employees to hold their employers responsible for injuries or crimes, making it harder for working people to unionize. This is the real agenda of these people. There's a reason why there's a bunch of billionaires who are behind this, and it's not because they're anti-abortion fanatics. If they were anti-abortion fanatics and they really wanted to cut abortion, they would be funding programs to make birth control more available. They're not. In fact, many of them are even opposed to birth control. It's a whole other topic, but so. And everything they're trying to do is get all these different things that I just talked about, to the Supreme Court, so that they can, quote, fix America. Well, I think we need to fix the Supreme Court. First of all, John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, in a letter to Congress a while ago, said that there's a crisis going on in the court, not in the Supreme Court so much, although it's happening there too, but across the federal bench, there's not enough judges. There's too many cases. So they need to expand the federal judiciary, and then they need to add 4 more people in the next 4 years to the U.S. Supreme Court, so that to make it more representative of America. Right now we've got, what, 5 Catholics, 6 Catholics on the court?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And, you know, I'm not explicitly anti-Catholic, but hey, how about some diversity on the court to make it representative of America?
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its 2 owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
Report.com. So people wonder why militias all of a sudden. How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Anthony Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, this is just, you know, we were speaking earlier about should we have vaccine passports in the United States. I'm actually inclined to say yes. I think it'll also increase compliance as these more dangerous and virulent variants are out. One of the things I didn't get to, it's all in the article that I published over at HartmannReport.com, but that I didn't get to is that just 3 hours after Fauci told Rand Paul the South African variant will infect you even if you've been previously infected with the wild variant, as if you had never been infected before. Right after Fauci told Rand Paul that in the Senate, you know, just making Rand Paul look like a complete ass, which of course he is. Right after that, just 3 hours after that, Joe Biden spoke to the nation and said the same thing. I mean, he didn't literally say, you know, the South African variant, but he said, you know, these variants are coming. This is why we have to wear masks, even if you've already had COVID, even if you've gotten your vaccines. We need to keep the masks going. We need to block these variants. This is a big threat to the United States. We don't want to go back. And of course, you've got Republican governors who are overtly trying to sabotage him. And I think that these Republican governors like DeSantis and Abbott and Nome, that these Republican governors who are actively trying to sabotage efforts for people to wear masks in their states are actually hoping for more deaths so that by the time the elections roll around, November of next year, November 2022, they will be able to say, well, yeah, so 500,000 people died on Joe Biden's watch, but 700,000 died 500,000 died on Donald Trump's watch, but 700,000 died on Joe Biden's watch. Now, I realize how cynical that sounds, but I can't come up with another explanation. Can you? I mean, why would Greg Abbott want more citizens of Texas to die? Why would he want a more rapid spread of the highly contagious British variant in his state? Why would he want the South African variant, which is not only more contagious and more deadly, but also kills people who've already had COVID? Why would he want that ripping through his state? There has to be some sort of political benefit to him in this. Is the political benefit just the short-term benefit of being like, hey, I'm a tough guy and I'm a skeptic and I'm, or whatever kind of weird BS that he's tossing out? Or is it that they're trying to say, yeah, Trump let 500,000 people die, but that wasn't so bad. Look at what Biden's doing. I realize I sound just absolutely cynical and skeptical, but what can I say? But anyhow, in the good news portion of this, in his first 59 days, Joe Biden has administered 100 million shots. His goal was 100 million at the 100 days. And now Krispy Kreme. I remember Krispy Kremes. Krispy Kreme is giving you a free original glazed donut, which are really good. I don't know if they make gluten-free ones, but, I didn't become gluten intolerant until 2001. I remember Krispy Kremes. And they're giving you one free donut a day for the rest of the year if you simply come in with proof of vaccination. So, I'm talking about we need a vaccine passport. Krispy Kreme, there's companies out there who are saying, we can make money with this. And Krispy Kreme giving away donuts, yeah, it sounds like, they're going to lose money. No. Anybody who comes in to get their one free Krispy Kreme donut is going to walk out with 3 or 4 more, or a half a dozen or a dozen for their friends and neighbors. And they're going to get in the habit of going to Krispy Kreme and maybe buying a cup of coffee, which is far more profitable than the donuts. So, anyhow, we'll see where they go. Ed in Smithville, what is it, Michigan?
Missouri.
Missouri, okay, M.O. It says here you disagree with me, so you go to the front of the line. What do you want to yell at me about, Ed?
Well, I don't really want to yell at you, nothing. I've got a cousin that lives right down by the border, and her church is trying to help those people out, and it just went crazy, and you hear Biden's side of the story, and he says, well, they're getting it under control, and it's not even close. I mean, I'm getting pictures right from it. And then they're spreading the COVID out. I mean, they're releasing people into Texas right now that have not had a COVID vaccine, that have not had a COVID test or anything. And it's like, well, I think that should be our main objection right now. I mean, I know there's a lot of other stuff out there in the political world, trust me. I've been around a couple of years too. And I can't believe that he jumped in there first day and signed all these executive orders without getting some kind of a plan in place. I mean, some of the pictures that she sent me are actually disturbing. I mean, they're disturbing. That's why they're not putting this stuff on the air.
Ed, are you done? Because I'd like to reply.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First of all, there are, and you can go to, I don't know if Snopes has debunked this yet, but I've seen no shortage of, there's a lot of really gruesome pictures that are going around that are not contemporaneous photos. They're older pictures. And some of them aren't even American pictures. Maybe not. But here's what I know to be true. Just let me finish. I'll let you rebut whatever I say, Ed. Okay?
All right.
Number one, The border was never opened. Republicans started immediately after Joe Biden won the election back in November. Republicans started saying he was going to open the border. The border is not open now. It has never been open, number one. But those Republican talking points, and you've got multiple Republicans who have literally on the floor of the House and Senate said the border's open. Fox News has said the border's open hundreds of times in the last 3 months. Those lies that the border is open are being heard in Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and it's driving people up to the border. The crisis, to the extent that there is a crisis, is happening on the Mexican side of the border because we're not letting them in. The border's closed. The one exception to that is kids. There are young people who are coming. There was, for example, one of the, I think it was Sheldon Whitehouse, maybe not. I forget which member of Congress it was, but he was down there 2 days ago. And there were 3 kids whose father had brought them to the border. Father got COVID and died. The 3 kids are orphans. They're all under 12. And they're applying for asylum in the United States. Now, Trump would have said, just go back out in the desert and die. And literally hundreds and hundreds of people got sent back, children got sent back out into the desert and died. What Biden is saying is, okay, we'll bring you in, the children. And there's about 5,000 of them now, which doesn't seem to me like some kind of massive crisis. I mean, that's how many people die in 2 days from COVID in the United States, if we want to talk about what's a crisis and what's not a crisis. But we got about 5,000 children now that the Trump administration was treating either with brutality by putting them in cages or simply saying, no, go die in the desert. I don't care if your dad died of COVID. And we're pursuing a more humane policy of trying to find a place to put those kids, trying to get them back to their original countries if we can find relatives, or trying to get them into the foster system or something if there's nothing to be done. And I think that's a reasonable human Christian thing to do.
Okay.
And number 3, I don't get this whole crisis rhetoric. There's no crisis.
Well, your numbers are completely wrong, I guarantee you. I've seen pictures. My cousin works in a church, and they're trying to help these people out. And your numbers are way off. And as far as
that's what I read in the paper this weekend.
As far as the border being open, yes, it is open. There's no fence or nothing. I went down there last year, and I went down to Mission, Texas, where they were building the wall there. But then I drove along the whole along the border for miles and miles, and there's no. There
are places where there's no border wall. I'm not disputing that, but I'm talking about the places where people typically cross in large numbers. Those are all closed.
Okay, if you don't have a wall or some way to protect the borders.
Now, I get you want to turn us into East Germany, but I'm running out of time. Ed, I'm sorry. Thank you for the call. Thanks for a civil conversation. I do appreciate it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. Great piece about this, by the way, over at Daily Kos, about how the Washington Post is basically echoing all these Fox News. And welcome back. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind today?
Buenos dias, mi amigo. Great day to be a citizen of the world again, huh?
Yeah, what's up, Chaz?
Hey, before I get started, first let me say, if you're anti-abortion for all circumstances, then you're in favor of rapists getting shared visitation. Yes or no?
Yeah, it certainly seems like it should be that way, yeah.
All right, here we go.
Not that it should be that way, but I mean that's the logical next step of that absurd logic. Yeah.
Here we go. When cons scream about bipartisanship, they're actually saying you Democrats back up against the wall. Like in the case of abortion, conservatives don't like abortion. Okay, fine. Then we need contraception funding. Well, cons don't like to pay for others. Fine. Then we need Plan B emergency contraception. Well, cons don't like contraception. Fine. Then we need kids to go to sex ed classes. But cons don't like sex ed classes. Well, fine. Take some time off and get ready to raise a kid. Well, cons won't support maternal leave. Well, fine. Go ahead and have the unwanted kid. Well, cons don't want single moms on welfare. Fine. Give them to gay parents who want kids. Look, you can pay a little for birth control now or a lot for SNAP, TANF, schools, and prisons. What happened to cons that hate being regulated, Tom?
Yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense, Chaz. And as I was pointing out earlier, they're using, people who are well-intentioned, essentially, people who listen to their priests or their pastors and are motivated by their religion. They're listening to them on this issue, and they're being misinformed and malinformed, and the consequence is that, is unwanted children who are growing up in poverty and despair and ending up, in terrible circumstances as teenagers and adults. And it's just, go ahead.
Yeah, and like Miss Dennis says earlier, some of those voters now are going to be swept out, put out to sea because they're trying to use a bigger net to catch, minorities.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you very much, Chaz. Matt in Austin, Texas. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Tom, I want to thank you first for what you've done to enlighten me. I'm in my 80s. I've never missed voting. But I'm kind of, I look back on it now after listening to you, and I realize how uninformed and that I have been. What I think is the crucial thing is for people to wake up and not just vote in the national election for the president and their senator and their congressman, but to vote in their state houses. Because if you don't do that, they're doing this nonsense with gerrymandering and all of this stuff that they've been doing for years and years, at least for 60 years, and we don't have a chance when they do that. More people.
Yeah, and this is why vote by mail is so important, Matt, because when Louise and I get our ballots, we've got a couple of days to sit down and go through all these local elections that we had no idea about and look up the people who are running for those offices and make an informed decision. Vote by mail allows you to do that. Having you show up in the ballot box and then discover there's a name there you don't have a clue, or at the polling place, rather, doesn't. Matt, thank you. In your 80s, you're my new role model, Matt. I appreciate the call, and thanks so much. What you said was so spot on. We'll be right back, coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. My Hidden History series has been growing. So far, I've taken on guns, the Supreme Court, voting, monopolies, and oligarchy. They're available wherever fine books are sold. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election to the Trump family's collusion with Russia to Ivanka Trump's trademarks to federal spending at Trump properties to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Eddie in Agra, Kansas. Hey, Eddie, what's up?
Tom, I just wanted to point out, first off, the hypocrisy of the Republican Party, and that is Kyle Rittenhouse, the teenager, went out and cold-bloodedly murdered people, and the Republicans raised millions of dollars to defend him. Over the past week, since we talked, a 13-year-old boy saw his mother beat up, and when he saw what was about to happen, he shot the husband, a war man, a soldier. And so one of the things we see here is not one penny has been raised to help this young boy. And I want to point out that the skeleton in the closet of the Republicans is that the Republicans and the pastors are notorious wife beaters and child molesters. But when you go to court, no one will. It's hard to get it's hard to get prosecution or to get an arrest on a Republican, especially if he's a war hero or a police hero.
Yeah, or white, just more generally.
Right.
Eddie, I'm unwilling to characterize people's based on their political affiliation in such personal ways. But I think your other point, and particularly the thing about Kyle Rittenhouse is just obscene. I get it. I totally get it. Anita in San Antonio. Hey, Anita, what's up?
Hey, Tom. When I hear these people talking about abortion, it drives me crazy when they talk about caring about this embryo or fetus or whatever they think it is. It isn't about that. It's about controlling women. If men could get pregnant, there would be abortion clinics everywhere. There would be drive-through abortions, and it would be
a sacrament.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I don't understand this. It's a way to punish women also. That's why when they say, "Well, I don't believe in abortion in the case of rape or incest," well, then that tells you right there it's not about this so-called baby, which it's not. It's an embryo or fetus. It's about the woman, punishing the woman for enjoying sex.
Yeah, and not being opposed, or at least being only weakly opposed to rape and incest. I mean, that's. I mean,
right.
How else can you characterize it?
Well, yeah, and they're kind of trapped because either are they okay with rape and incest? Most people will say, yeah, no, they don't want to force women to have, forced pregnancies because if they were raped or it was a product of incest, but yet, they pretend they say they care about this unborn fetus or embryo, and they don't care about that either because they don't care about children that are born.
Yeah,
so
and that's
just
the proof.
All about controlling women.
Yeah, and that's the absolute proof of it, and that's the point that I made in my article today over at HartmannReport.com. I said this is about power. This is not about life. This is about power. It's about power over women. And period, full stop. Anita, thank you very much. You said it very, very well, and I do appreciate it. Alan in Springfield, Virginia. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Yes, I was thinking about the migrant situation and the border wall and all that stuff. If we were to begin negotiations with these Central American countries, and if they agreed to this, it would help solve or eliminate all these problems. We begin by making them territories and begin the process of making them states down the road.
They're holding hearings on D.C. statehood today. I'm going to be talking about that in the next hour. And and Puerto Rico, there's a piece of legislation that's been introduced into the House. In fact, I think it might have passed the House, giving Puerto Rico the ability to declare their statehood, essentially. Of course, it'll get filibustered in the Senate. Another reason to blow up the filibuster. But I'm with you, Alan. And I think, frankly, we should add 3 states. I think that we should add D.C., we should add Puerto Rico, and we should add all the U.S. territories, the British Virgin Islands, Guam. There's a half a dozen little islands out there. Yeah, that are U.S. territories where the people who live there are U.S. citizens. They should have the rights of U.S. citizens. They should have representation in the House of Representatives and the Senate.
And another thing for gerrymandering, if we were to take and create a law where a district could be limited to, say, 8 sides, that would be a great step forward to end gerrymandering.
Yeah. Well, the states, a couple of states have emulated California now, and I apologize, I don't know how many, but one of those things that it's constantly changing, and there are several states that are looking at doing this right now, where they have a nonpartisan citizens commission, essentially, of people who are drawing the congressional districts based on math instead of politics, based on geography and math. and without even looking at what political parties are there, what races are there, what racial groups are there, any of that kind of stuff. And it's worked very well in California. It's really cleaned up California's elections. And frankly, H.R. 1 would make that the law of the land for every state. And that's another important reason to pass the For the People Act, H.R. 1. Like I said, we're going to have to blow up the filibuster to get it. But I'm all in favor of that. The filibuster was just it's an old racist thing from John C. Calhoun. Alan, thank you. Thank you. Spot on. And with regard to Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras, Ronnie Reagan screwed those countries up terribly because they wanted to give their citizens free health care and free education. That's what they were doing. It's time for us to deal with some reparations down there, too.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonro, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. We know better. You are on our side. But the vast majority of Tyroleans were not on the Allies' side. The book A Castle in Wartime.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So it's World Water Day. On the line with us is Rianna Eckel, the senior organizer with the national organizing team at foodandwaterwatch.org. Rihanna's Twitter handle is RIANNAECKEL, or at Food and Water, your choice. Rianna, welcome to the program. Tell us about this 2021 Water Act and the growing threat of water privatization.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on this afternoon on World Water Day. The Water Act of 2021 is a monumental piece of water justice legislation. It was recently reintroduced by Representative Lawrence and Representative Representative Brenda Lawrence and Representative Ro Khanna, as well as Senator Bernie Sanders. And this bill is really important because it will fully fund our water infrastructure system. Our water funding peaked in 1977. It has been cut nearly 82%. And as a result, we have a growing water affordability crisis in our country. We have increasing pollution. There are water shutoffs, of course, the threat of privatization, as you mentioned. So what the Water Act would do is fully fund our water infrastructure so that everyone in our country can have access to safe, affordable drinking water. And the EPA uses the EPA's estimate that we need $35 billion a year for our water infrastructure. And currently we are investing about $5 billion a year from the federal government. So there's a huge gap we need to cover right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, Flint, Michigan got all the publicity, but the fact of the matter is, number one, there's hundreds of Flints, not necessarily quite as egregious or as sudden and not done for political purposes or to help big donors the way Rick Snyder did in Michigan, but there are hundreds of places where the water is not safe for children. It's still lead polluted. And I know with electricity, you had privatized for-profit electricity in California when Enron owned it, and they used that for blatant political purposes, shutting down, doing rolling blackouts across the state just to justify a petition to kick Gray Davis out of the governor's mansion so they could replace him with a Republican. In this case, it was Arnold Schwarzenegger. And here in Oregon, here in Portland, tried to buy our system, and PGE refused to sell it to the city, even though the city was offering more than PGE was asking for, but they would only sell to a private entity. This is a real crisis, and we see the same thing down in Texas. With electricity, this is a real crisis. What is it like with water? How many water systems around the country are privately owned versus publicly owned? And is there any national regulation of that, or is it state by state or county by county?
Yes, that nationwide, most people are served by a public utility, but private corporations are really using this funding crisis, the water funding crisis, to prey on vulnerable cities who are struggling to make ends meet. For example, I live in Baltimore, and there were a few private companies swooping around trying to buy the water system because the city has been struggling to put the investment that we need into the city. There's a lot of water main breaks, infrastructure problems, and we can see that that's happening in communities across the country. And that really all stems from the fact that when the federal funding for our water systems disappears, those systems have to use rate increases in order to make up the funds that they need. So as our infrastructure is crumbling, utilities have to raise rates higher and higher and higher. And so now, especially, there's concerns that after this coronavirus pandemic, so many municipal governments are struggling to make ends meet, and private companies, offer what seems like incentive or good deals for municipalities, offering a lot of upfront cash to buy their water systems. But of course, we know that, private companies are beholden to their shareholders. They're working to make their profits, and they charge on average 59% more than municipal water services. And it also leads to declining quality of water because they are cutting corners to maximize profits, as well as lost union jobs and declining customer service in general. So it's really a huge problem when, private corporations seek to profiteer off of something that we all really need as a basic human right. And a lot of the regulation is done state by state level. And there are even some pushes in states that the private water industry is pushing state legislation to make it so that if they purchase a system, they can then use the cost that they spent buying that system to justify later rate increases. So they can make up all of that money directly from ratepayers. So it's a huge, scam, and it's just a profiteering motive for them, and it's customers.
Yeah, electric utilities run that same scam too. We're talking with Rianna Eckel, the senior organizer with the national organizing team at foodandwaterwatch.org, foodandwaterwatch.org. Rianna, I don't recall if it was when I was living in New Hampshire or when I was living in Vermont, but one of those two states 20 years ago or thereabouts, one of these companies, and I think it was Nestle's, came into town and bought, a couple hundred acres and said, okay, we own this land, so we're going to set a drill up here and we're going to drill down into the water table and pump out like 1 million gallons of water a day to send off to our bottling plant. And the people in the state freaked out and got it stopped, as I recall. But there's a huge kerfuffle around this. But this has happened in other states where they say, well, we own the land, therefore we can take all the water we want out from underneath it, even if it runs people's wells dry and things. Is that a piece of this, or is that a whole separate issue?
Yeah, that is a whole separate issue. The Water Act really just focuses on restoring funding to our municipal systems and working to really support public water systems to make sure that, everyone can have access to safe, affordable public drinking water. Of course, private companies taking advantage of, land rights and creating bad contracts with municipalities is still something that we need to fight. But the Water Act is really just looking to make sure that we can reinvest in our water system and make sure that we can put the money that we need to so that people can have safe water.
Okay, so to the Water Act then, and we have a little less than 2 minutes left here before we're going to hit hard break. Who are the sponsors? Where is it at? Presumably in the House. What are the probabilities of passage? What's going to happen when it hits the Senate? And what can people who are listening right now who would like to see water in the United States once again become safe and clean and reasonably affordable do?
Yes, those are great questions. So the bill has been introduced by Representative Brenda Lawrence from Michigan and Representative Ro Khanna from California, and Senator Sanders is introducing the bill in the Senate. The bill number is H.R. 1352, and it has just been reintroduced a few weeks ago, but we're really going to be using this opportunity now that the last COVID relief bill has passed. The president and the House and the Senate they're focusing on an infrastructure bill. And of course, people may think of roads and bridges when you think of infrastructure, but water is a huge part of that as well. So we are going to be pushing for tenets of the Water Act to be included in that infrastructure package because, investing in our water system, there's studies that show the Water Act could create up to 1 million jobs across the country. So it's a solution that we need now for safe water and, to help the economy recover after the global pandemic has subsided. And so if people want to make sure that everyone has access to safe, affordable public drinking water, the best thing to do is to reach out to your representatives and to your senators and urge them to co-sponsor the support bill.
And the phone number for Congress is 202-225 or 224. Either one will get you there. 3121, 202-224-3121. And you can learn all about it at foodandwaterwatch.org. Rianna Eckel, thank you so much for dropping by today. It's great talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Nice meeting you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the place where smart people get their news. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Let's see. David in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Oh, it's been a while since I talked to you, Tom. I was just talking to you, thinking about all these bond issues that the local and county and cities pass every time the election rolls around, every 2 years or 4 years. And I sit here in my own community and I see, well, they passed a bond issue to fix the schools, and I see no schools getting fixed, and I see no streets getting repaired, and I see no lighting being produced properly with these bond issues. And they sit on this bond issue for 30 and 40 years sometimes, and that money has never funneled back into the system. And it just irks me that they have these bond issues put on the ballot every year you turn around, and there's got to be a way to fix that. And I'm 80 years old, and I've seen this happening for the last 10, 15 years with these bond issues and stuff. So I'd kind of like to know what your feedback is on some of these bond issues that
just I got distracted in the middle of that, David, and I think I must have missed a really important point. Are you concerned that the bond issues are not passing, or are you concerned that they are passing and the money isn't being used appropriately?
I'm concerned that they are passing and the money is not being utilized appropriately for the bond issue.
That's not even legal in most places. I mean, I certainly know here in Oregon, if a bond issue passes and that bond is not used exactly the way it's specified in the legislation or in the what would you call it, citizens initiative, somebody broke the law. Is it different in Pennsylvania?
No, in California. I'm in California.
Oh, you are? It says here Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
She must have misunderstood me. No, I'm in California. Yeah, Pittsburgh, California is where it's.
Oh, Pittsburgh, CA. Okay, so in California, don't the laws have to comport with? I mean, you know, if a bond, you know, if money's raised to pay for a school and they use it instead to pay for the policeman's ball, I mean, isn't that a crime in California too?
Oh, yeah, it is a crime. The issue I have is when I see these bond issues passed, I don't see the improvements being made in some of these, is what I'm saying. You know, I've seen a school down the street here, the same buildings, no painting going on, the yards aren't cleaned up properly, they're not repaved.
Well, maybe they just got barely enough, and they're fixing the inside rather than the outside, putting in new HVAC systems or replacing the lights or something like that. I mean, we got schools in the United States right now where there's literally no books or pencils. They can't afford it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This way of circumventing the tax procedure is just kind of strange, is what I'm saying.
Well, it sounds to me, David, like you should get yourself on the school board, you know, because that's the best way to do something about it. David, thank you for the call. I appreciate your concern. I'm sorry I can't speak to the specifics that you're talking about. I'm unfamiliar with them. I've never seen a bond issue used or not used or used inappropriately anywhere I've lived, but I've never lived in California. So, you know, who knows? We'll be right back, 20 minutes past the hour. This week on The Science Revolution is Dr. Justin Frank, author of the Trump, Obama, and Bush on the Couch series of books. He's here on how to deal with the trauma of the pandemic and the trauma of 4 years of Trump. It's been a stressful time. Some of us have lost family and friends and have found it difficult to stay safe and pay the bills. The Trump years have been a challenge to democracy and our sanity. Dr. Justin Frank is here to help. Tune into The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So last Thursday, when we were just first starting to learn that this young scumbag had murdered 6 Asian women and two other people, 7 women altogether, and was claiming that it was because he was sexually frustrated or tempted or whatever, you know, we had a conversation on this program about incels and all this kind of stuff. And for me, from my point of view at that point in time, And of course, at that point in time, all we had, the only thing we knew, was being filtered through the mind and mouth of what turns out to be a racist Georgia sheriff. So that should have been the first flag. But it was breaking news. And, what we were talking about was, young men who think that they're entitled to women. And I think that, as time has gone on, we've learned a hell of a lot more about this. And in fact, I wrote about this over the weekend, in fact, yesterday, in a piece over at the Hartmann Report titled How Institutional Racism and Gun Culture Have Poisoned America. The subtitle is, It Takes a Month in Georgia to Register to Vote, but you could buy a gun for a mass murder in 10 minutes. It turns out that there's a whole bunch of issues here. There is the issue of religion having arguably twisted this man's mind. Again, I'm not so concerned about the shooter. He's an ass, a scumbag, a killer, and whatever he claims his motive is, he needs to be in prison for the rest of his life, period, full stop. But that said, religion is making some people crazy in ways that cause them to treat women badly. And I think, apropos of the conversation we had earlier about abortion, for example, number one. Number two, you've got anti-Asian hatred going on all across the country. And this has been radically exacerbated over the last 5 years by Donald Trump, particularly over the last 2 years, actually, by Donald Trump. But going back 5 years, Trump making China in general the kind of the whipping boy, as it were, the easy insult. First, it was around trade, and then it became around the virus and coming up with phrases like kung flu and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is just nakedly racist stuff. And as a result of this, we're seeing incidents of violence against Asian Americans exploding across the United States in the last 12 months. Just exploding. I mean, more than doubling. And I don't think that you can say that. I mean, one of the memes that was going all around the internet yesterday was, if somebody walked into a donut shop and killed 8 cops, would anybody be saying, oh, gee, I wonder if he has an eating disorder, right? It's fairly obvious what's up. This guy killed, 6 Asian women. So, number two, you've got anti-Asian, basically racial hatred, racialized hatred that has been ginned up and amplified by the former president of the United States, who got all upset last night on Fox News when one of the hosts called him the ex-president. He said, hey, you said that, not me. Like, he's still trying to pretend he's president, this ass. Anyhow, number two. Number three, and this is getting, like the religion thing, is getting very, very little coverage, is femicide. He murdered 7 women. And murdering women is not even a hate crime in the United States. Why is that? Well, I mean, I think you can go talk about, the whole issue with these guys with abortion and birth control and blah, blah, blah. It's about, women are generally regarded as second-class citizens in the United States. And then even below that, you've got people who are non-binary, who don't identify as men or women. And so we've got, that whole, you can't call it racist, but, that whole ism of hatred. And then on top of this, and I pointed this out in The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, my first book in the Hidden History series, that the Second Amendment was passed when it was, the way it was, and using the language it was, in order to maintain the slave patrols in Georgia, South Carolina, and Virginia. And it was all about white people keeping black people under their thumbs with the slave patrols. They're state militias. Those were the militias that the Second Amendment refers to, the well-regulated militias. And, and then in 1876, when Reconstruction failed, the Klan was using guns just like nooses to terrorize black people in the South. So it shouldn't surprise us that all these things are coming together at the same time. Which brings us to the fourth issue that I think this incident brings up, which is the fact that in Georgia, and I lived there 13 years, and I'm a graduate of the Georgia Police Academy, or at least a course that the Georgia Police Academy held. And, I know you could buy a gun in Georgia, and you just show up, lay your ID on the table, and cross their palms with a few $100 bills, and you've got a gun. And you can walk out and kill somebody in 10 minutes. But if you register to vote in Georgia, seriously? If you register to vote in Georgia, you have to wait a month for confirmation that you're registered to vote. I mean, they have to check you out. Voting is like, it's important stuff. This is serious stuff. We got to take our time. There are 13 states in the District of Columbia that have waiting periods for guns. And according to science published in the National Academy of Sciences, a waiting period, they run from 3 to 14 days in those 13 states plus DC. A waiting period, those waiting periods alone last year cut 750 gun homicides that would have happened otherwise. And a lot more than that of suicides, because these are impulsive crimes.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And this murderous scumbag walked into a gun store Thursday morning, bought a gun, and 2 hours later was shooting up a massage parlor. That should not be happening.
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Aunna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles from their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Astonishing news out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that has to do with the lifespan of Americans. Since World War II, the average lifespan of American men and women have continuously increased, all the way up to 78.8 years in 2019. Continuous increase. Things were getting better, more and more people were getting health care, we were making medical technology advances, there was a rather dramatic decline in smoking between the 1990s and the 2010s. All kinds of things were working together. And then came Donald Trump's response to COVID-19, causing America, with 4% of the world's population, to have 20% of the world's deaths. The result of that has been extraordinary. For the first time since World War II, American life expectancy has declined. It's all over in a new video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. And today I mentioned this in the first hour, but it's I don't think I can emphasize it enough. If you want to see the impact of Wyoming with fewer than 1 million people, or roughly 1 million people, having, actually it's fewer than 1 million people, Wyoming having 2 senators, and California with 44 million people having 2 senators, and the people of Wyoming
fewer than 1 million people being able to cancel, speaking of the Republicans' favorite word, being able to cancel the votes of 44 million people in California. If you want to see that slightly fixed, some remediation here, the House Oversight Committee is holding a hearing today. I don't know if they've already held it, if it's going on now, or if it's going to be on later. But the House Oversight Committee was holding a hearing today on H.R. 51, which is statehood for Washington, D.C. Now, Puerto Rico might be a bigger lift, and what I refer to as Oceania, but they maybe Islandia or Atlantis or something. But I think that we really need 3 new states. I think D.C. needs to become a state. I think Puerto Rico needs to become a state. And then all these U.S. territories from the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, to I said British earlier. That's part of Britain. But the Virgin Islands to Guam I don't even recall the Marshall Islands. I mean, there's a bunch of islands where the people who live there are U.S. citizens, but they're not represented. Combine them all into one and give them a representative in the House of Representatives and 2 senators. Do the same thing with Puerto Rico, which has, 3 million people, I believe? And do the same thing with Washington, D.C., which is about 770,000, 800,000 people. There's more people in D.C. There's only 600,000 people in Vermont, and about that in Wyoming. There's more people in D.C. than either Vermont or Wyoming. And yet Vermont and Wyoming both have 2 senators and a member of the House of Representatives who can vote. D.C. does not. Puerto Rico does not. The U.S. territories do not. But this hearing was just about D.C., and it's the House Oversight Committee, and I got a note from Indivisible about this. It says, tweet your members of Congress and demand that they support D.C. statehood. Record a video and let your members of Congress know why D.C. statehood is important to you, and you can pass that to them via indivisible.org. Write a letter to the editor on why D.C. statehood is important for democracy reform. You can do that wherever you live in the country. You can also post things on social media, which I guess is kind of an extension of the tweet. And then, Indivisible has some tools on this. So, but again, this is, I think it was Ted Cruz. No, it was Mitch McConnell who said that D.C. statehood is part of the Democrat socialist agenda. Right. It is part of democracy, letting people who are citizens have a vote. That really is part of democracy. I mean, I don't know what else you could call it. So, anyhow, picking up your phone calls here. Kevin in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hi, I called to disagree with you. I think you are not cynical enough. As soon as I heard that Texas was completely opening up, I thought, well, they're just trying to kill brown people. So, I mean, it's the most efficient voter suppression there is.
And you think Florida, you think Ron DeSantis is trying to kill black people in Florida?
Well, probably, yeah. And, Puerto Ricans probably.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I can't rebut that. I can't confirm it either, but I can't rebut it.
All right.
Kevin, thank you for the call. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Your thoughts, Paul?
Well, first of all, I'd say Aristotle would disagree with your solution to kind of throw all of the Marshall Islands and all the Pacific Islands together. They would have to share some geographical commonality, and
Why?
I don't see anything wrong with that. That if the Marshall Islands, Guam, and Rota were to have their own representation.
Well, no, the geographic commonality that they have is that they're all going to be heavily impacted by rising oceans. That they are, that's why I said call it Oceania. They all have very similar issues and concerns, don't they?
In that regard, they do. But what I'm saying is I don't know what so much about the difference. My niece taught on Rota for 2 years, and that might in my late partner lived on Guam for a couple when her father was in the Air Force. So I don't know what but they might be able to tell you better than just lumping them together. I think is.
But no, I get it. They also all have issues with indigenous populations too.
Yeah. Well, the commonality is that they deserve to be represented, and certainly does Puerto Rico and this, Tom, the whole Democrat socialist. The operative word is socialist. They'll just throw socialists at the wall and hope it sticks every time. But what I was actually speaking of Aristotle, I wanted to talk about the shooting, and you were talking about the shooter being corrupted by religion. And, there's something about it here. First of all, the idea that someone would commit a heinous, premeditated first-degree murder, there's no question about. I don't know, you can argue about the first shooting, but when you're moving on, first of all, you go buy a gun across the street and come across and shoot people. As you're moving along from place to place, there's no question that you know what you're doing, and that's premeditated. So, But to characterize that as having a sexual, I don't know what 21-year-old male doesn't have a sexual addiction. That just made me laugh about, how stupid. And then the sheriff's deputy saying that he had a bad day, and then there was.
Well, white shooters always have an excuse, right?
It's always an excuse, and this is what I'm getting to, is when you said it, maybe he's been corrupted by religion. This is what's happened. People, I just was reading Aristotle. I bought a complete Aristotle, and I bought halfway through it. I'm reading the Ethic, and I had gotten through that, and I thought, this is the morality that most of us are familiar with. We live by Aristotle's ethic and morality, but we've been told and convinced that that's Christian morality, and it's not. And I have been making this case for a number of months now with a Bible study that I belong to, that Christianity is not a religion of morality. And that's what we've been told all these years. And that's where people just start making it up. What we have, the morality that's Christian morality, is essentially I call it neo-Judeo-Calvinism. And with the evangelical movement of today, that's even beyond it. They're just making it up. Because, Tom, if you read Aristotle's Ethics, I thought my head was going to be spinning, going, I got to really pay attention to this. No, I thought, this is stuff that's all intrinsic, a priori. We all understand. This is how we were raised. It's very complicated. It's very detailed. You don't find detailed discussions of ethics and morality in the Bible at all. And to the degree that it is mentioned, these are things that already have been established, and people already know about them. They basically are Aristotle's ethics. So when Paul mentions morality, sexual immorality, he talks about, there's no discussion about abortion in the Bible. There's no discussion even about homosexuality. When Paul mentions sexual immorality, he's talking about gratuitous sex. He says you should be married, you should be unmarried and celibate, but if you can't do that because you may be engaging in sexual immorality, which means gratuitous sex with multiple partners, that's what he's talking about. When you talk about the sins of Sodom, it's not about homosexuality.
Paul, you got 15 seconds to the break to make your point.
Okay, the point is the morality that the right-wing evangelical and the neo-Judeo-Calvinists are just that's the morality. They're making it up on the fly.
Yeah,
and then
I agree.
I
agree. And it's doing a lot of harm, in my opinion.
It is.
And I'm not going to say that it's responsible for this shooting. I think it goes way beyond that. I think that in fact, this is the point that I ended this piece on, is that the reason why the South has the laxest gun laws, and hang on just a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The reason why the South has the laxest gun laws and the strongest voter restrictions are the same reason, which is racism, and we need to be looking at that too. Paul, thank you for the call. And welcome back. Jamie in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Hey, Jamie, you want to disagree? About what?
Yes, I would. You just, with the last caller who called in and said that Texas opening up, the reason was because they just want to kill black people, brown people. And you said, oh, I can't dispute that. Do you think that that's
well, the fact,
acceptable?
hang on just a second, Jamie. The fact is that black and brown people die at much higher rates than white people do in Texas of COVID.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you're gonna open the state, you're going to be killing more black and brown people. And the caller was asserting that that was Greg Abbott's motivation. I can't speak to his motivation. I don't know what is in his heart. But that's certainly what the consequence is going to be.
Well, I think that you could probably dispute his wildish, outlandish claims that his intentions of opening up the state of Texas was to kill black and brown people. That is buffoonery.
So what do you think the intention was?
That is absurd. You said you couldn't dispute it.
Right. So what do you think? I can't. What do you think that is? I can't say if it's true. I can't say if it's not. What do you think the intention was?
I think as a political commentator, which is what you are, that you could say, no, that is completely insane and absurd for you to make that claim, that there's no basis for that claim, instead of putting this propaganda on this so-called free speech TV is absolutely
But Jamie, I do have a
absurd.
basis for that claim.
This is propaganda. This is just
Jamie,
propaganda.
I do have a basis for that claim.
No, you don't have a basis.
Are you interested in hearing what that basis is?
I think you just said that black people supposedly
Are you interested in hearing what the basis for that claim is? Here it is. I'm going to tell you right now because we have a minute and 15 seconds, and if I have to talk over you, I'm going to do it. On April 7th, prior to April 7th, from late February until April 7th of last year, the Trump administration was doing everything they could to stop the spread of the virus in the United States. The post office was preparing to send 5 masks to every American family. Jared Kushner was putting together a program to try to crank up vaccines. They were working with schools around the country. I mean, they were doing everything they could. And on April 7th, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and all of them, ABC, CBS, NBC, they all ran the headline of this study that was released on April 7th that said that black people and Hispanic people, but specifically black people, were more than twice as likely to die of COVID as were white people. And in that following week, Rush Limbaugh suddenly started saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about here. Donald Trump started saying it's just going to go away. The official position of the federal government was we're not going to do anything about it. The post office was told abandon that order for those 5 masks. The Freedom Works and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce started saying reopen America. The only thing that had happened was for the very first time on April 7th, the news came out that mostly black people were dying. And suddenly the entire Republican establishment was like, let's open the country back up again. So if, I see she dropped off the call. Jamie, there's your evidence, and you can look it up. It's not a secret. It's easy to find. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, my new book is out. The Hidden History of American Oligarchy, Reclaiming Our Democracy from the Ruling Class. Want to know more? The links are all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was listening when you were talking about the water problem in the country, and I think it's sacrilegious for these companies to deplete the aquifer of this country by the millions of gallons of water that they take out of it and put in plastic bottles. And then I saw a program on this several years ago, that someone also brought up this subject, and there were boats with looks like baby zeppelins on that were full of water that they were selling to other countries, taking by boat to other countries. And, you know, humans need water to survive. And that water belongs to all of us, not to those companies. But by the time they take that much out and put it in plastic bottles, when it comes to the average person, they're going to be charging unbelievable amounts of money just for us to have water in our homes. And it's a sacrilege. That water doesn't belong to those companies, and they don't have a right to just go on forever. And people, I tell all the people in this country, stop buying bottled water and killing the animals with the plastic and taking the water out of our mouths. And I think every one of them should do that and let these companies just bite the bullet and quit doing that. And that's
and let me add a data point to your argument, Joan, that you may be able to cause people to stop drinking water with, and that is something called microplastics. Microplastics are tiny pieces of plastic that are so small that they're invisible, and yet they get into your bloodstream, they can get into other parts of your body, they can get into your organs, they can cause damage to your kidneys, in particular to your kidneys, but also to your liver, to your spleen, to your heart, to your lungs. These microplastics get lodged throughout our bodies. Some of the chemicals that are in those microplastics are cancer-causing chemicals, and regular tap water has very little microplastics in it. Bottled water can have up to 10,000 particles of microplastic per bottle because it sheds off the inside of the bottle into the water. The longer that water has been sitting in that bottle, or the greater distance it's been shipped from, or the more times it's sat in the sun or been in a warm environment, the more microplastic there is in it, and the less healthy, it is for human beings. We need to stop drinking bottled water. I'm telling you. Joan, thank you for the call. Pedro in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Pedro, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I have a comment just about something you had said, an analysis you made recently that you repeated several times in the past regarding the need to add states to the country to get more representatives, in particular, I guess, Democratic representatives.
Well, and to give rights to people who are already citizens.
Right. And my concern about that is that we're looking at this situation from the point of view of the power, okay, of the country in power, of the colonizing country of these islands, and I'm just going to go that way for a split second. Puerto Rico has had a very strong independence movement that has been crushed by the powers that be on the island and the United States. Many of the leaders of the independent movement in the past have been assassinated or have been imprisoned and silenced. So that when we get these referendums that oftentimes are imposed on the island of people to vote on whether they're going to want to become a state or remain a commonwealth, it's rare the time that they also include independence. Puerto Ricans have fought for independence ever since Columbus landed on that island, and almost gained it, as you mentioned in the past, just before the Americans took over.
Do you think, I recall in the 60s there was a strong Puerto Rican independence movement. In fact, there was a so-called terrorist group that was blowing things up in the United States. Is that still intact, Pedro? My understanding is that, and maybe I'm completely wrong because I'm no expert on Puerto Rico, but my understanding is that it has become basically a fringe movement in that country, sort of like the secessionists out in California.
Or the civil rights movement here when they killed Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all the other leaders. And that's the issue that's going on now.
That was not a fringe movement.
Well, no, it wasn't a fringe movement, but the movement for independence in Puerto Rico wasn't a fringe movement either until most of these leaders were assassinated or imprisoned. Obviously,
I get that. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm asking what the status of it is right now, given all the horrors that have been visited upon them.
It's a growing movement. The universities, especially students, are more and more leaning toward independence. Again, they don't have a voice. the independence movement, because the governor is a pro-state governor, and many of the governors prior to him have been pro-state, have ignored the independence movement as small as it is now, because it was forced to shrink, because they were, most of the leaders were killed off or imprisoned. The so-called terrorists that shot up the Congress here in the United States, they were fighting, they saw themselves fighting the enemy, which was us, So they were, they took matters into their own hands, obviously, in terms of violence. Yeah. But the fact is that most people want to be free. We fought a revolution, and hundreds of thousands of people died to become independent. Cuba fought Spain to be independent. Haiti fought the French to be independent.
No, Pedro, pardon the interruption. We have half a minute here. Okay. So would it be, in your mind, better to say Puerto Rico should have the choice? It just seems like being a colony is crappy. They should have the choice of being a state or being an independent nation, right?
I think many people, given the education and the support, they would lean toward independent nation because everybody wants.
Well, let's give them a chance to figure it out. I mean, it's Pedro. I got to run. I'm sorry, and that's something I need to learn more about, obviously. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Be good to yourself and those around you, and get your damn vaccines. Only hurts a little bit.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.